Maya wiped down the same counter for the third time that night. The diner was empty except for a truck driver nursing his coffee in the corner booth. Outside, the street lamps flickered against the darkness. It was nearly 3 a.m, and the world felt quiet in that heavy way it does when everyone else is asleep. She liked the night shift. Preferred it, actually. Fewer people meant fewer questions, fewer eyes watching her, fewer chances for someone to try and strike up a conversation that went beyond, "What can I get you?" and "Here's your check." The truth was, Maya had been alone for so long that she'd forgotten how to be any other way. She was 28 now, but sometimes when she caught her reflection in the diner's windows, she barely recognized the woman staring back. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a few years ago. Her dark hair was always pulled back in the same tight ponytail. She wore the same faded jeans on her days off, the same tired expression every single day. Maya hadn't always been this way. There was a time years ago when she'd been different, lighter maybe, more hopeful. But that girl was gone, buried under layers of disappointment and hurt that had piled up so high she couldn't see past them anymore. Her childhood had ended abruptly when she was 12. That was the day her mother left. Just walked out of their apartment one morning and never came back. Maya remembered coming home from school, finding the note on the kitchen table. It said something about needing to find herself, about not being ready to be a mother. The words were blurry now, but the feeling wasn't. The feeling of being unwanted, disposable, not enough to make someone stay. After that came the foster homes. Some were fine, some weren't. Maya learned quickly not to get attached, not to expect anything, not to trust that any place was permanent. She moved 6 times before she aged out of the system at 18. 6 different houses, 6 different families who saw her as a temporary responsibility, not a person who needed to belong somewhere. By the time she was 19, Maya thought she'd finally found someone who wanted her. His name was Derek, and at first he seemed like everything she'd been looking for. Someone who paid attention to her. Someone who said he'd never leave. But Derek's promises came with conditions, with anger that exploded without warning, with control that tightened around her like a rope until she couldn't breathe. It took Maya 3 years to leave him. 3 years of convincing herself that his apologies meant something, that things would get better, that maybe she deserved the way he treated her. When she finally walked away, she had nothing. No money, no support system, no idea where to go. She just knew she couldn't stay. That was 3 years ago. Maya had moved to this small coastal town where nobody knew her name or her story. She found the cheapest place she could afford, a studio apartment above a laundromat that smelled like detergent and dryer sheets all the time. The walls were thin enough that she could hear every conversation from the apartment next door, every footstep from the one above. But it was hers, and that was what mattered. She got the job at the diner within a week. The owner, a man named Frank with a gray beard and kind eyes, didn't ask many questions. He just needed someone willing to work nights, and Maya needed the money. It was a fair trade. The work was simple. Take orders, deliver food, refill coffee, collect tips. Maya was good at it because it didn't require her to be anything other than efficient. She smiled when necessary, made small talk when expected, but never let anyone get close enough to matter. Her coworkers had tried at first. Beth, the afternoon waitress, had invited her to a birthday party. Kenny, the cook, had asked if she wanted to grab drinks after a shift. Even Frank had mentioned more than once that there was a community church that served dinner on Sundays if she ever wanted company. Maya had politely declined every invitation. After a while, they stopped asking. That's how Maya preferred it. People always left eventually. They disappointed you, hurt you, or just decided you weren't worth the effort. It was easier to keep them at a distance from the start than to let them in and watch them walk away later. Her days off were the hardest. When she wasn't working, the silence in her apartment felt suffocating. She'd watch television without really seeing it, scroll through her phone looking at other people's lives, people with families and friends and things to look forward to. Sometimes she'd walk along the beach, watching couples hold hands and children build sandcastles, feeling like she was looking at a world she'd never be part of. Maya had tried therapy once, about a year after leaving Derek. The counselor had been nice enough, but after 3 sessions, Maya stopped going. Talking about her past just made her feel worse, like picking at a wound that would never heal. What was the point of reliving everything when nothing could change it? Her mother was still gone. The foster care system had still failed her. Derek had still hurt her. Talking about it wouldn't erase any of that. So Maya did what she'd always done. She survived. She paid her bills, showed up for her shifts, and told herself that this was enough. That wanting more was just setting herself up for disappointment. But late at night, when the diner was quiet and she was wiping down tables that didn't need cleaning, Maya sometimes wondered if this was really all there was. If she was going to spend the rest of her life moving through days that all felt the same, surrounded by people but completely alone, going through the motions without ever really living. She'd look at her reflection in the dark windows and see someone who'd given up. Someone who'd decided that being hurt again wasn't worth the risk of trying. Someone who'd built walls so high around her heart that nothing could get in, but nothing could get out either. The thing about walls, though, is that they don't just keep pain out. They keep everything out. Joy, connection, hope, love, all the things that make life worth living. Maya had traded the possibility of being hurt for the certainty of being empty, and she didn't know how to undo that trade. As her shift ended and the sun started creeping up over the horizon, Maya grabbed her jacket and headed for the back door. She'd walk home the same way she always did, through the alley that cut behind the diner and led to her street. She'd climb the stairs to her apartment, maybe sleep for a few hours, then wake up and do it all over again. This was her life. Small, contained, predictable, safe. Maya pushed open the door and stepped into the cold morning air, thinking about nothing in particular. She had no idea that in a few minutes everything was about to change, that the walk she'd taken 100 times before was about to lead her to something that would crack open all those walls she'd spent years building. Sometimes life doesn't ask permission before it transforms you. Sometimes it just puts something in your path and waits to see what you'll do. And Maya, who thought she'd already lived through the hardest parts of her story, was about to discover that her real story was just beginning. The alley behind the diner was darker than usual that morning. One of the streetlights had burned out, leaving long shadows across the pavement. Maya pulled her jacket tighter against the November wind and started walking, her breath coming out in small white clouds. She'd walked this path so many times she could do it with her eyes closed, past the dumpster from the restaurant next door, around the puddle that never dried up, through the narrow space between the buildings that opened onto her street. 5 minutes, maybe less, and she'd be home. Maya was thinking about whether she had enough milk for cereal when she heard it. A sound, soft and muffled, almost swallowed by the wind. She stopped walking. Probably just a cat, she thought. There were strays in the alley sometimes, digging through trash looking for scraps. She took another step. There it was again. Not a cat. Something else. Maya's first instinct was to keep walking. Whatever it wasn't her problem. She'd learned long ago not to get involved in things that didn't concern her. Mind your business, keep your head down, stay out of trouble. That's how you survived. But the sound came again, and this time it was clearer. Weaker. Almost like, no. It couldn't be. Maya turned around slowly, her heart starting to pound. She listened, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. The dumpster. It was coming from near the dumpster. She walked toward it, her feet moving even though her brain was screaming at her to leave, to go home, to not get involved. The closer she got, the more certain she became. That wasn't an animal. That was a baby crying. And then she saw it. A cardboard box, the kind that copy paper comes in, sitting on the ground next to the dumpster. The top flaps were folded closed, but not all the way. Maya's hands were shaking as she reached down and opened them. Inside was a baby. A tiny baby girl, wrapped in a thin pink blanket that looked like it had come from a dollar store. The infant's face was red from crying, her little fists clenched, her lips tinged with blue. She couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. For a moment, Maya just stood there, frozen. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. Who leaves a baby in an alley? Who does that? But even as she thought it, she knew the answer. Someone desperate, someone who didn't see any other choice, someone maybe not that different from her own mother. The baby's eyes opened. They were dark and wide, and they looked right at Maya, and something happened in that moment. Something Maya couldn't explain. It was like a hook caught in her chest and pulled hard. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could do was stare at this tiny, helpless person who'd been left behind, just like she had been. "Oh God," Maya whispered. Her hands were still shaking as she reached down and carefully lifted the baby out of the box. The infant was so light, so cold. Too cold. "It's okay. I've got you. You're okay." But the baby wasn't okay. Maya could tell just by touching her. She was freezing, her little body trembling. How long had she been out here? Hours? All night? Maya's paralysis broke. She tucked the baby inside her jacket, trying to share her body heat, and started running. Not toward home. Toward the hospital, 6 blocks away. She ran faster than she'd run in years. Her lungs burning, her legs aching. The baby pressed against her chest. "Stay with me," she kept saying, even though she didn't know if the baby could hear her or understand. "Just stay with me. We're almost there." The emergency room doors slid open and Maya burst through them, gasping for air. "I need help. I found a baby." "She's freezing." Everything happened so fast after that. Nurses surrounded her, taking the baby from her arms. A doctor appeared, asking questions. "How long ago did you find her? Where exactly? Was she breathing? Was she responsive?" Maya tried to answer, but her thoughts were scattered. She watched them carry the baby through a set of double doors, watched them disappear, and suddenly felt more alone than she had in her entire life. A police officer showed up within 20 minutes. Then another one. They asked her the same questions the doctors had, plus more. What was she doing in the alley? Did she see anyone else? Did she hear anything? They were gentle but thorough, and Maya understood why. They had to make sure she wasn't involved, that she was telling the truth. She sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room for 3 hours, answering questions, giving statements, drinking terrible coffee from a vending machine. Finally, a doctor came out. The baby was stable. Severely hypothermic and dehydrated, but stable. Another hour in that cold, maybe 2, and it would have been too late. "You saved her life," the doctor said, and Maya didn't know what to say to that. She hadn't done anything special. She'd just been walking home. She'd just heard a sound. The police told her she could leave. They had her contact information if they needed anything else. Maya stood up, picked up her bag, and started walking toward the exit. This was the part where she went back to her regular life. Back to her apartment, her job, her careful routine. She'd done the right thing. She'd helped. Now she could move on, but she couldn't make her feet move toward the door. Maya turned around and walked back to the nurse's station. "The baby," she said. "The one I brought in. Is she? Can I see her?" The nurse looked surprised but nodded. "Just for a minute. She's sleeping." They led Maya to a small room where the baby lay in a clear plastic bassinet, connected to monitors that beeped softly. Someone had cleaned her up, put her in a hospital gown that was way too big. She looked so small under the white blanket, so fragile. But she was breathing. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, and her skin had a healthier color now. Maya stood there just watching her. She didn't even know this baby. In a few days, the hospital would transfer her to child services. They'd find her a foster home, start the process of figuring out what happened, maybe try to locate her biological family. This baby would move on to whatever life was waiting for her, and Maya would never know what happened next. That should have been fine. That should have been enough. But as Maya looked at that sleeping infant, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Something that scared her more than anything else could. She felt connected. Like this small person mattered to her in a way that was completely irrational, but absolutely real. She thought about all those foster homes she'd lived in. All those temporary places where she'd never quite belonged. She thought about being passed from one family to another, always wondering why nobody wanted to keep her. And she looked at this baby who'd been left in a box in an alley, and she knew exactly how that story went. "I'm sorry," Maya whispered, though she didn't know if she was talking to the baby or to herself. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." She left the hospital as the sun was fully up, the morning shift starting at the diner, people heading to work, the world moving forward like it did every day. Maya walked home slowly, her mind spinning. She tried to forget. Tried to tell herself that it wasn't her concern, that she'd done her part. But over the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about that baby, about those eyes that had looked right at her, about how cold and alone she'd been in that box. Maya found herself calling the hospital on her break at work. Just checking in, she told herself. Just making sure the baby was okay. The nurses said she was doing well, that child services would be taking custody soon. "Has anyone claimed her?" Maya asked. "Like her mother or family?" "Not yet," the nurse said. "But we're hopeful." Maya hung up and went back to work, but her hands weren't steady when she poured coffee. Her mind wasn't on her tables. All she could think about was that baby. about to enter the same system that had failed her, about to become another file, another case, another child waiting for someone to want them. That night, Maya did something she never thought she'd do. She looked up the number for Child Protective Services. She stared at her phone for 20 minutes before finally calling. "I found a baby a few days ago," she said when someone answered, "and I was wondering, what happens to her now?" The woman on the phone introduced herself as Mrs. Rodriguez. She had a warm voice, the kind that made you feel like she actually cared about the answers to her questions. She explained that the baby would be placed in foster care once she was released from the hospital, that they were still trying to locate any family members, that these situations were always complicated. "Why are you asking?" Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. "Are you thinking about getting involved?" Maya opened her mouth to say no, to say she was just curious, to say she was just checking in and nothing more. But what came out was, "Could I be her foster parent?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Maya thought they'd been disconnected. Finally, Mrs. Rodriguez spoke. "Have you ever been a foster parent before?" "No. Do you have children?" "No." "Are you married?" "Living with a partner?" "No, I live alone." Another pause. "Ms. Carter, I appreciate what you did for this baby. You saved her life. But becoming a foster parent is a serious commitment. It requires training, home studies, background checks, and from what I understand, you work night shifts and live in a studio apartment. Those aren't ideal circumstances for caring for an infant." Maya felt something deflate inside her chest. Of course she wasn't qualified. What had she been thinking? She was barely taking care of herself. How could she take care of a baby? "You're right," Maya said quietly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called." "Wait," Mrs. Rodriguez said quickly. "I didn't say it was impossible. I said it would require some changes. If you're serious about this, really serious, there are steps we can take. But I need to know why. Why this baby? You don't know her. You found her by chance. What makes you want to take this on?" Maya didn't have a good answer. Not one that made logical sense anyway. How could she explain that when she looked at that baby? She saw herself, that she knew exactly what it felt like to be unwanted, abandoned, thrown away like trash, that she couldn't stand the thought of this child growing up feeling the way she had, because nobody should have to grow up feeling like they weren't wanted. Maya finally said, "And I can't save everyone. I couldn't save myself when I was a kid, but maybe I can save her." Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," she said finally. "Here's what we'll do. Come to my office tomorrow. We'll talk about what would be required. I'm not making any promises, but we'll talk." That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay in her small bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what she was doing. This was crazy. She didn't know anything about babies. She barely had enough money to support herself. Her apartment was too small. She worked too much. She wasn't qualified to be anyone's parent, but she kept thinking about that box in the alley, about how easily she could have walked past it, about how close that baby had come to dying alone in the cold, about how, for the first time in 3 years, Maya felt something other than emptiness. She felt purpose. The next day, Maya sat across from Mrs. Rodriguez in a small office that smelled like coffee and had children's drawings taped to the walls. Mrs. Rodriguez was older than she'd sounded on the phone, maybe in her 50s with gray streaks in her black hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything. "Let me be honest with you," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "The odds of this working out are not great. You're young, single, financially unstable, and you have no experience. Normally, I wouldn't even consider it. But there's something about you. When you talk about this baby, I see something I don't see often. I see someone who understands what it's like to be her." Maya's throat felt tight. "I was in foster care. From 12 to 18. "I know, I pulled your records." Mrs. Rodriguez leaned forward. "Here's what would need to happen. 1, you'd need to complete foster parent training. That's 12 weeks of classes. 2, you'd need to find a larger apartment, something with at least 2 bedrooms. 3, you'd need to switch to daytime hours at work so you can actually be present for the baby. 4, you'd need to pass background checks and home inspections. And 5, you'd need to prove to me that you're mentally and emotionally prepared for this." It sounded impossible, but Maya heard herself saying, "Okay, I'll do it." "All of it?" "All of it." Mrs. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment. "Why, really why?" Maya took a breath. "Because that baby deserves someone who'll fight for her. Someone who knows what it's like to feel unwanted and will make sure she never feels that way. And because maybe taking care of her is how I finally take care of myself too. The next 12 weeks were the hardest of Maya's life. She signed up for the foster parent classes that met twice a week in the evenings. She learned about child development, trauma, attachment, safety, nutrition, everything. At first, she felt completely out of her depth, surrounded by couples who seemed so much more prepared than she was. But Maya didn't quit. She took notes on every single thing. She stayed after class to ask questions. She read every book and article they recommended. When other students talked about their motivations, about wanting to help kids or expand their families, Maya stayed quiet. Her reasons felt too raw, too personal to share. Finding a new apartment was harder. Maya didn't have much saved, and 2-bedroom places were expensive. She finally found one, a small unit on the second floor of an older building. It wasn't fancy, but it had a bedroom for her and a smaller room that could work for a nursery. She took extra shifts at the diner, saving every penny she could for the deposit. Convincing Frank to move her to day shifts was surprisingly easy. "It's about time," he said when she asked. "I've been worried about you working nights all alone anyway. And Kenny's been wanting to switch to evening shifts. It works out." The background checks made Maya nervous. Her past relationships, her history in foster care, her lack of stability. Would they see all that and decide she wasn't fit to be a parent? But the reports came back clean. She'd never been arrested, never been accused of anything, never given anyone a reason to doubt her character. The hardest part was the home visits. Mrs. Rodriguez came to her new apartment before Maya had even finished unpacking. She walked through every room, looked in every cabinet, asked about her support system, her income, her plans. "Do you have anyone?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. "Family, friends, someone who can help when things get hard?" Maya wanted to lie, to say she had people, but she couldn't. "No, it's just me. That concerns me. Raising a child alone is difficult even for people with experience. You're going to need help." "I'll figure it out," Maya said. "I've been alone my whole life. I know how to manage." Mrs. Rodriguez gave her a look that was both sympathetic and skeptical. "Being alone is one thing. Being alone with a baby is another. I need you to start building a support system. Join a parent group. Talk to your neighbors. Find a community. You can't do this completely isolated." It was good advice even if Maya didn't know how to follow it. She'd spent so many years keeping people at a distance. How was she supposed to suddenly let them in? But she tried. She introduced herself to the woman who lived next door, an elderly lady named Mrs. Chen who seemed delighted to have a young person in the building. She started going to a foster parent support group that met at the library. She didn't talk much, mostly just listened, but she showed up. That was something. Meanwhile, the baby was still in the hospital. The doctors wanted to make sure she was completely healthy before releasing her. No family had come forward. No mother, no father, no relatives at all. The police investigation had hit dead ends. This baby was truly alone in the world, except maybe she wasn't. Maybe she had Maya. After 11 weeks, Maya got the call. Mrs. Rodriguez wanted to see her. Maya's heart pounded the entire drive to the office. This was it. Either she'd passed all the tests and could become a foster parent, or she'd failed and would have to let the baby go. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't waste time. "You've completed all the requirements. Your apartment passed inspection. Your background check is clean. Your training is done. Against my better judgment and probably against protocol, I'm approving you as a foster placement." Maya couldn't breathe. "Really? Really? But hear me clearly. This is temporary. You're a foster parent, not an adoptive parent. This baby still belongs to the state. If family comes forward, if circumstances change, she could be removed from your care. You need to protect your heart." Maya nodded, even though she knew it was too late for that. Her heart was already involved. Had been since the moment she opened that cardboard box. "The baby's being released from the hospital next week," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "I'll need you to take a week off work to get settled. I'll be checking in frequently, and Maya, I need you to promise me something. Anything. If it gets too hard, if you feel like you're drowning, you call me. Pride doesn't raise children. Ask for help when you need it," Maya promised. 1 week later, Maya stood in a hospital room looking down at the baby who was about to change her life. Someone had dressed her in a white onesie with yellow ducks on it. She was awake, looking around with those dark eyes, completely unaware of how close she'd come to dying, or how hard Maya had fought to get to this moment. "Are you ready?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. Maya picked up the baby, holding her carefully, terrified she'd do something wrong. The infant was warm now, healthy, heavier than she'd been that morning in the alley. She made a small sound and turned her head toward Maya's chest, searching instinctively for comfort. And Maya, who hadn't cried in years, felt tears running down her face. "I'm going to call you Hope," she whispered, "because that's what you are. You're my hope." The first night with Hope was the longest night of Maya's life. She'd set up the small bedroom as a nursery, following all the safety guidelines from her classes. A crib with a firm mattress, no blankets or pillows, a baby monitor on the dresser. She'd bought diapers, formula, bottles, clothes in newborn sizes. On paper, she was prepared, but nothing prepared her for the reality of being completely responsible for another human being. Hope cried. Not just cried, but screamed, her tiny face turning red, her little fists waving in the air. Maya tried everything she'd learned. She checked her diaper, tried feeding her, rocked her, sang to her, walked around the apartment, bouncing her gently. "Nothing worked, please," Maya whispered, exhausted and terrified at 2 a.m. "Please tell me what you need. I don't know what I'm doing." Hope just kept crying. Maya felt panic rising in her chest. What had she been thinking? She couldn't do this. She didn't know how to be a mother. She was going to mess this up, just like everything else in her life. She should call Mrs. Rodriguez right now and admit she'd made a terrible mistake. But then she looked down at Hope's face, really looked at her, and she realized the baby wasn't just crying because she needed something. She was scared. She was in a new place with a new person, and she was terrified. Just like Maya had been terrified in every foster home. Every time she'd been moved to a new family, never sure if anyone would actually take care of her. "I'm scared too," Maya said softly. "I don't know what I'm doing either, but we're going to figure it out together, okay? I'm not going anywhere, I promise." She stopped trying so hard to fix the crying and just held Hope close, swaying gently, humming a melody she didn't even remember learning. And slowly, gradually, Hope's cries quieted. Her body relaxed against Maya's chest. Within minutes, she was asleep. Maya stood there in the dark nursery, too afraid to move and wake the baby, tears streaming down her face. This tiny person trusted her, needed her, and somehow that was both the most terrifying and most beautiful thing Maya had ever experienced. The first few weeks were a blur. Maya learned that babies eat constantly, sleep in unpredictable bursts, and produce an impossible amount of laundry. She was exhausted all the time, running on 3 or 4 hours of broken sleep. Her eyes had permanent dark circles. Her hair was always in a messy bun, and she wore the same sweatpants for 3 days straight at one point. But something was changing inside her. Something she hadn't expected. Every time she fed Hope, changed her diaper, gave her a bath, Maya felt something loosening in her chest. All those years of believing she was broken, unlovable, not good enough, they were being challenged by this small person who looked at her like she was everything. Hope didn't care about Maya's past, didn't care about her scars or her mistakes or her trauma. When Hope looked at Maya, she saw safety, warmth, home. And Maya started to wonder if maybe she could be those things. If maybe she was more than just the sum of her worst experiences. Mrs. Chen, the neighbor, knocked on Maya's door one afternoon. "I heard the baby," she said with a kind smile. "I thought you might need help." Maya's first instinct was to say no, to close the door and handle everything herself like she always had. But she was so tired. And Mrs. Chen's face was so genuinely warm. "I'm making dinner," she said. "Real food. You need to eat something other than cereal." So Maya let her in, let her hold Hope while Maya ate homemade soup. Let her show her a different way to burp the baby that actually worked. When Mrs. Chen left, Maya felt something unfamiliar. She felt supported. The foster parent support group became a lifeline. Every Tuesday evening, Maya brought Hope and sat in a circle with other foster parents who understood the unique challenges. They talked about attachment, trauma, biological families, court dates, the exhaustion of loving children who might not stay. At first, Maya just listened. But one night, a woman asked her directly, "You're always so quiet. How are you really doing?" And Maya, who'd spent years keeping everything locked inside, found herself talking about finding hope in the alley, about her own childhood, about being terrified every single day that she was going to fail this baby who'd already been failed by everyone else. "But here's what I'm learning," Maya said, surprised by her own words. "Taking care of her is teaching me how to take care of myself. Every time I comfort her, I'm comforting that scared kid I used to be. Every time I promise her she's safe, I'm telling myself the same thing. The other parents nodded. They understood, and Maya realized she wasn't alone anymore. She'd accidentally built a community. Work became different too. When Maya returned to the diner after her week off, she was different. People noticed. Beth, the afternoon waitress, asked to see pictures of Hope. Kenny, the cook, made extra food for Maya to take home. Frank, the owner, told her she could bring Hope to work if she needed to. "You seem happier," Frank said one day, "like you finally found something that matters." He was right. Maya had spent years just surviving, going through the motions. But now she had a reason to actually live. Every morning when she woke up to Hope's cries, instead of feeling exhausted, she felt grateful. Grateful to be needed. Grateful to have someone to take care of. Grateful to be building something that mattered. The months passed. Hope grew. She started recognizing Maya's face and would smile when Maya came into the room. That first smile felt like the sun coming out after years of winter. Maya took approximately 100 pictures of it and showed them to everyone who would look. Hope started sleeping longer stretches, started making babbling sounds, started reaching for toys with her tiny hands. And Maya documented all of it like every milestone was a miracle, because to her they were. But underneath all the joy was fear, the kind that kept Maya awake some nights even when Hope was sleeping peacefully. Because Hope was still technically in foster care, still legally available for reunification if biological family came forward, still not permanently Maya's. Mrs. Rodriguez did her check-ins every month. She'd watch Maya with Hope, see how they interacted, ask questions about adjustment and bonding. "You're doing really well," she said during a 6-month visit. "Better than I expected, honestly." "What happens next?" Maya asked, the question she'd been too scared to voice until now. "The courts are still trying to locate family, but it's been 6 months with no leads. If another 2 months pass with no family coming forward, parental rights will likely be terminated. At that point, you could petition to adopt." Adopt, the word made Maya's heart race. The idea that Hope could be hers permanently, not just temporarily, that no one could take her away, that they could be a real family. "But I need to prepare you," Mrs. Rodriguez continued gently. "Things can change. Until the adoption is final, there's always a chance. You need to protect yourself emotionally." Maya looked down at Hope, who was sleeping in her arms, her little hand wrapped around Maya's finger. "It's too late for that. I already love her. If I lose her, it'll break me. But if I hadn't taken this chance, I'd still be broken anyway. At least this way I got to have her for a while." The court hearings were agonizing. Maya had to sit in a courtroom while lawyers discussed Hope's case, talked about whether anyone would claim her, debated what was in the child's best interest. Maya had to hold her breath every single time, terrified that someone would walk in and take Hope away. But no one came. Month after month, no one came forward. Finally, 8 months after Maya had found Hope in that alley, the judge made a ruling. No family had been located. Reasonable efforts to find relatives had been exhausted. Parental rights were terminated. Hope was legally free for adoption, and Maya was given the option to adopt her. She barely heard anything else the judge said. All she could think was, "This is real. This is actually happening. Hope can be mine." The adoption process would take months. More paperwork, more evaluations, more waiting. But Maya didn't care. She'd wait as long as it took. She'd fill out 1,000 forms. She'd answer 1,000,000 questions. Whatever it took to make Hope permanently hers. In the meantime, life continued. Hope learned to sit up on her own, and Maya threw a celebration dinner. Hope cut her first tooth, and Maya called everyone she knew to tell them. Hope said her first word, which wasn't quite mama, but was close enough that Maya cried anyway. And somewhere along the way, Maya realized she'd been healing. The nightmares about Derek had mostly stopped. The anxiety that used to follow her everywhere had faded. The belief that she was fundamentally unlovable was being replaced by something new. Not just because Hope loved her, but because Maya was learning to love herself. She looked in the mirror one morning and saw someone different. Not perfect, not without scars, but someone who was trying. Someone who was brave enough to love even though love had hurt her before. Someone who was building a life worth living. "We did it," Maya whispered to Hope one night, rocking her before bed. "We saved each other." The adoption hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in March, 14 months after Maya had found Hope in that alley. Maya woke up before dawn, too nervous to sleep. She'd bought a new dress for the occasion, navy blue with small white flowers. It was the first dress she'd bought in years. She dressed Hope carefully in a yellow dress that Mrs. Chen had made specially for the day. Hope was almost walking now, pulling herself up on furniture and taking wobbly steps while holding onto Maya's hands. She babbled constantly in her own language that only she understood, and she smiled at everyone she met. "Today's a big day," Maya told Hope as she brushed her soft curls. "Today you become officially mine. Not that you weren't already mine in every way that matters, but today it becomes legal. Today nobody can ever take you away from me." Hope grabbed Maya's face with both hands and planted a wet baby kiss on her nose. Maya laughed through tears. "Yeah, I love you too, kiddo." The courthouse was the same one where the termination hearing had happened. Maya had asked Mrs. Rodriguez what to expect, and she'd explained it would be quick, mostly a formality at this point. But to Maya, nothing about this was small or ordinary. This was everything. When Maya walked into the waiting area outside the courtroom, she stopped short. There were people there. A lot of people. Mrs. Chen was sitting in the front row, dressed in her Sunday best. Frank from the diner was there with Beth and Kenny. The whole Tuesday night foster parent support group had shown up. Even Maya's landlord had come, the one who'd approved her application for the 2-bedroom apartment when her credit wasn't great. Maya's throat closed up. "What are you all doing here?" Mrs. Chen stood and took Maya's hands. "You invited us, remember? You said anyone who wanted to come was welcome." "I didn't think anyone would actually come," Maya whispered. "Are you kidding?" Beth said, dabbing at her eyes. "We've been following this story since day one. We're not missing the ending." Frank cleared his throat roughly. "You're family, Maya, and families show up. Family." The word hit Maya like a physical thing. She'd spent so many years believing she didn't have family, that she'd never have family. But looking around at these people who'd shown up for her on one of the most important days of her life, Maya realized she'd been building a family all along. Not through blood, but through choice and care and showing up when it mattered. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared, looking professional in a suit but with a warm smile on her face. "You ready?" Maya nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. She held Hope tighter, and they all filed into the courtroom. The judge was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and reading glasses perched on her nose. She smiled when she saw Hope. "Well, this must be the young lady we're here about today." The proceeding itself was simple. The judge reviewed the case file, confirmed that all requirements had been met, asked Maya a few questions about her commitment to raising Hope. Maya answered each one clearly, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "Ms. Carter," the judge said, "I've reviewed your history. I know you came from foster care yourself. I know you understand the system from a child's perspective. That gives you insight that many parents don't have. From everything I've seen in this file, you've given this child stability, love, and a home. You've worked hard to become the parent she needs." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "She saved my life," she said quietly. "I know everyone thinks I saved her by finding her that morning, but she's the one who saved me. She gave me a reason to believe I could be more than my past. She showed me I was capable of love. She made me want to be better." The judge smiled. "That's what children do. They make us want to be our best selves." She picked up her gavel. "It is the finding of this court that the adoption is in the best interest of the child. The petition for adoption is granted. Hope Carter is now legally your daughter." The gavel came down and Maya's whole world changed in that instant. Hope was hers. Actually, legally, permanently hers. No one could take her away. They were a family. Maya couldn't stop crying. Happy tears, relief tears, years of pain finally healing tears. Everyone in the courtroom was crying too. Mrs. Chen was sobbing into a tissue. Frank had his arm around Beth, who was crying on his shoulder. Even Mrs. Rodriguez was wiping her eyes. After they signed all the paperwork, after they took photos, after the judge congratulated them, everyone moved to Frank's diner for a celebration lunch. Frank had closed the whole place to regular customers so they could have a private party. There was a cake that said, "Welcome to the family, Hope," in pink frosting. Maya sat at a table surrounded by people who cared about her, holding her daughter, and tried to process how much her life had changed. 14 months ago, she'd been alone, isolated, convinced she'd never have connections with anyone, never have a family, never have anything worth living for beyond basic survival. And now she had all of this. A daughter who depended on her. Friends who showed up, a community that supported her, a life that felt full and meaningful and worth fighting for. Speech, Kenny called out and everyone joined in. Maya stood up, still holding hope. I'm not good at speeches, she started, and everyone laughed. But I need to say thank you. A year ago, if someone had told me this was where I'd be, I wouldn't have believed them. I'd spent so long thinking I was too broken to have a normal life, too damaged to be a good parent, too scared to let anyone in. She looked down at Hope, who was trying to grab the edge of the table. Then I found this little girl and everything changed. She didn't care about my past or my mistakes. She just needed someone to love her. And in loving her, I learned how to love myself. I learned that being broken doesn't mean being beyond repair. It just means you've survived hard things. Maya's voice cracked. Each of you has been part of my healing. Mrs. Chen, you taught me it's okay to accept help. Frank, Beth, Kenny, you showed me what a work family looks like. My support group friends taught me I'm not alone in my struggles. Mrs. Rodriguez, you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you for giving me this chance. She lifted Hope up. And this little girl who was thrown away in an alley, who wasn't supposed to survive, who had every reason to give up, she chose to live. And she chose me. She's the bravest person I know. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. That evening, after everyone had gone home and it was just Maya and Hope in their apartment, Maya sat in the rocking chair in the nursery. Hope was almost asleep, her head heavy on Maya's shoulder, her breathing deep and steady. Maya looked around the room. At the crib she'd assembled herself. At the mobile hanging above it that played soft lullabies. At the walls she'd painted a soft lavender. At the bookshelf filling up with children's books. This room that had been empty when she moved in was now full of life and color and love. I need to tell you something, Maya whispered to Hope, even though she was probably asleep. When I found you, I thought I was saving you. But you saved me. You gave me permission to stop running from my past and start building a future. You showed me that broken people can still create beautiful things. You made me brave, she kissed Hope's forehead. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to mess up sometimes. I'm still learning how to do all of this. But I promise you'll never doubt that you're wanted. You'll never wonder if you're loved. You'll never feel like you're too much or not enough. You'll know every single day that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Hope sighed in her sleep, burrowing closer to Maya's chest. Maya thought about that morning 14 months ago, how she'd almost walked past that alley, how close she'd come to never hearing those cries, how easily she could have called the police and walked away without getting involved. If any one thing had been different, she wouldn't be here now. She wouldn't have hope. She wouldn't have this life she'd built. But she had heard those cries. She had stopped. She had opened that box, and everything had changed. Maya had spent so many years believing that her childhood trauma had ruined her, that her painful past meant she couldn't have a happy future. She'd thought being abandoned meant she was unlovable, that being hurt meant she was weak, that surviving hard things meant she was broken. But now she understood. Surviving hard things meant she was strong. Her scars weren't signs of weakness. They were proof she'd lived through difficult things and come out the other side. Her past didn't define her future. Her choices did, and she'd chosen love. Even when it was scary, even when it meant being vulnerable, even when there were no guarantees. Maya stood up carefully and laid Hope in her crib, covering her with a soft blanket. She stood there for a long moment watching her daughter sleep, feeling something she'd never quite felt before. Peace, contentment, home. She walked to her own room and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who'd walked through that alley 14 months ago. This woman smiled. This woman had people who cared about her. This woman was a mother. This woman was healing. Maya took out her phone and opened her photos. Thousands of pictures of Hope, smiling, sleeping, eating, playing, growing. A complete record of their life together. She scrolled back to the very first one, taken at the hospital the day Hope was released. Maya looked terrified in that photo, holding Hope like she might break, eyes wide with uncertainty. She took a new photo now, a selfie of herself smiling. Not a forced smile or a fake one, but a real, genuine, happy smile. She sent it to the Tuesday night group chat with a simple message. We made it. Thank you for being part of our story. The responses came immediately. Heart emojis, congratulations, celebrations. These people who'd been strangers a year ago were now her people. Her community. Her family. Maya turned off her phone and walked to the window. The street below was quiet, the same street she'd walked down countless times feeling invisible and alone. But she wasn't that person anymore. She was someone who mattered, someone who had people depending on her, someone who'd taken her pain and turned it into purpose. The girl with the broken past was gone. In her place was a woman with a hopeful future and a daughter who loved her. A woman who'd learned that healing isn't about erasing scars. It's about learning to see them as proof that you survived, that you're stronger than what tried to break you. Maya looked back at the nursery door, listening to Hope's soft breathing through the baby monitor. This tiny person who'd been left in an alley had given Maya more than just purpose. She'd given her permission to heal, to love, to believe in second chances and new beginnings. "Thank you," Maya whispered into the quiet apartment. "Thank you to whatever force had placed her in that alley at that exact moment. Thank you for giving her the courage to stop and look. Thank you for this second chance at life, at love, at family." The past would always be part of her story. The abandonment, the foster homes, the abuse, the isolation, all of it had shaped who she was, but it no longer controlled who she would become. Maya turned off the lights and climbed into bed, more tired and more content than she'd ever been in her life. Tomorrow she'd wake up and be a mother. She'd make breakfast and change diapers and play on the floor and read books and do all the ordinary things that made up a life. And it would be enough. More than enough. It would be everything she'd ever needed but never thought she'd have. A normal life, a family, a reason to keep going. As she drifted off to sleep, Maya's last thought was simple but profound. Sometimes the thing you save ends up saving you right back, and sometimes the most broken pieces fit together to create something beautiful.